Bem-vindos ao nosso Papo Supren. Hoje nós temos uma conversa com Daniel Christian Wahl, que é um ecologista, um biólogo, formado também em zoologia, que se especializou, fez um mestrado em ciência holística e depois fez um doutorado, um PhD em sistemas regenerativos naturais. Então, ele vem trabalhando como consultor, como educador, como instrutor em diversas universidades, diversas partes do mundo, desenvolvendo um trabalho maravilhoso, sendo um dos principais líderes dessa nova tendência da cultura regenerativa e também do design regenerativo. Então, welcome, Daniel. It's a pleasure to have you here in UNIÃO PLANETÁRIA, TV Supren. And I would like first to ask you about your background. Now, how did you become interested in this type of subject, like holistic science and guide education and design? Tell us a bit about how it happened.
Well, back in the 90s, when I was a marine biologist studying whales and dolphins, I remember having a moment where I just thought I could spend my entire life studying a particular species of dolphins. And if humanity continues the way it is going at the moment, then my grandchildren will only know these animals from books because they will go extinct within their lifetime. And so I decided that maybe the best way I could help the dolphins was not by investigating the dolphins any further, but by helping my own species to change its heading and the way it was impacting on Earth. And I also was very much disheartened by the way that reductionist science only allows things to be real if they're quantifiable in statistical terms. And so when I found out that there was a course in holistic science, I went back to study that for a year because it was an opportunity to still do science, but in a much more holistic and integrative way that sees things as a whole and understands relationships.
It's interesting that holistic science is a new branch, relatively new branch in science, and it's in opposition to the main trend in science, which is quite materialistic. And so how would you describe holistic science for the general public?
Holistic science is, basically there's only one place in the world where you can do a master's in holistic science, which is Schumacher College in the southwest of England. And it's basically all the sciences that try to look at the whole and the relationships within this living planet Earth, Gaia, rather than trying to be reductionistic and look at the parts and then try to explain the wholes based on analyzing parts. So the main components of holistic science are the cutting-edge new sciences like complexity theory, chaos theory, Gaia theory. They're all ways of understanding the dynamics and the relationships rather than quantifying only what is measurable.
As Amit Goswami says, the new science is bringing in consciousness, right? Because consciousness was something that was relegated as something just imaginary. But now consciousness is playing a key role in observation, in the studies and all the experiments. So this is quite interesting.
It's science becoming conscious of itself, where like the work of Umberto Maturana and Francisco Varela was really pioneering in this, or Gregory Bateson, starting to look at the way we do science in order to understand how science also only gives us a very useful, but a limited picture of the world. And when we understand how our own method of observation influences what we observe, which is actually what Heisenberg, the famous physicist, already said at the beginning of the last century, yes, then we begin to do a very different science and a much more humble science.
But most of the scientists still resist to this idea of incorporating spirituality and this integrated vision and life itself in their studies, right? I see there is a lot of evidence of the importance of consciousness, but most of the leading scientists still have some resistance to this type of worldview.
Yes, but I have a sense that it's slowly changing, because there are quite a lot of things now coming out also out of quantum physics and neuroscience that really prove that there is no such thing as objectivity. Science is an intersubjective consensus-making activity, and it's about how we observe the world, that we actually bring forth a world through the way we interact with it.
And to solve this problem that we face now, that's quite serious, the global warming and destruction of the biosphere and pollution and so on, we have to change the look.
Absolutely.
The way we understand our position in life, right?
One of my great mentors who I met at Schumacher College, Fritjof Capra, who's been in Brazil many times, said that if you follow the river of the ecological, the social and the economic crisis upstream, they all come together in a single crisis, which is a crisis of perception or a crisis of consciousness. It is the way we see the world that has created all the problems we're now facing.
If we change the look, then the world will be changed.
Quite literally.
It's very interesting that people always thought that the problem was outside, but the problem is really inside. We have to change ourselves so that the world can change as well.
Yeah.
Right?
One of the key shifts that we need to make is that we somehow as a culture have begun to tell a story that makes culture and nature separate, as if they're somehow not related. But of course we're biological beings first and foremost, and culture is an epiphenomenon of biological processes. And once we reintegrate ourselves into the wider family of life, and we understand that we are critically dependent on the health of ecosystems and the health of the planet as a whole, if we want to have another century on planet Earth, then we can begin to address issues like climate change and economic instability and social problems. All of that changes the minute we join the family of life again, which we actually never left. It's just that in our minds we seemed to think that we're separate.
Yes, but perhaps the biggest problem is that there are many interests, economical interests, that lead to the opposite direction, where people want to profit more, want to explore more the resources we have on Earth, and even having all this new way of thinking spreading out throughout Earth, but the big capital and the interests that are present somehow make it difficult for people to change and people to live in a condition that's more respectful to life.
But even that, I've been in this movement for maybe 20 years now, and 10 years ago, if you dared to say that we have a structurally dysfunctional economic system that we need to change fundamentally, people really considered you as a radical. But now you get the founder of the World Economic Forum saying the same thing. You get even the IMF admitting that we need to either redesign capitalism or find an alternative to it. Right now, the way our money systems and our economic systems work, they are structurally dysfunctional, and they force us to compete with each other and exploit people and planet. And so we will not create regenerative cultures around the world if we don't also address this issue of redesigning economics.
We have to redesign the way we live, right? And that's in the center of the regenerative design.
Redesigning the human impact on Earth from being exploitative and degenerative, which is what
competitive,
which is what we've done for really since the beginning of agriculture and this idea of nation states, and we began to compete against each other and exploit nature and each other, but we have the potential of fundamentally redesigning it so our influence on Earth and the community of life becomes healing and regenerating and restorative.
we have to go beyond sustainability, because most people today are more into sustainability, but in a way that they are just trying to correct a few mistakes they have done, but still it's not enough to be sustainable, right?
Yes, but I would like to stress that sustainability is still very important. It's a step, a milestone on the way towards restoration and regeneration. There's a danger now that regeneration is becoming very popular, that people want to dismiss sustainability. But in many ways, sustainability is the point where we don't add any more damage to the system, but because we've done so much damage over quite a long period of time, we need to go beyond it, and we need to start healing the wounds that we've created in society and in ecosystems, and regenerate the earth so we have a future.
It's interesting that the design that you propose in your book has to do with learning with nature, because sometimes we don't know what to do. We want to make things better, but sometimes we go to the wrong direction because we don't know enough. And so learning from nature seems to be a key issue, right?
Yeah, learning, even going beyond that, learning to design as nature again. Because as nature, the core sentence in biomimicry is that life creates conditions conducive to life. That is the principle of evolution. That's how this planet has become so rich and abundant as it is now, and as it was when we first started destroying it. And it's not just learning from nature, because when we say from, then nature is still an other. It's learning to design as nature. So we really integrate ourselves again into the natural world and learn about the patterns that we observe in ecosystems, and then redesign our cities and our economic systems and our systems of production and consumption in a way that nature, or the rest of nature, has shown us.
Nós vamos agora dar pequeno intervalo nessa nossa conversa com Daniel Christian Wahl sobre design regenerativo. Então fiquem conosco. Até já. Estamos de volta com o nosso Papo Supren e hoje nós estamos conversando aqui com Daniel Christian Wahl, que é biólogo, zoologista e se especializou em design natural e essa nova cultura que está surgindo, que é a cultura regenerativa. Ele é consultor de várias entidades, inclusive foi consultor da CIFAL, que é um órgão que trabalha junto com a UNITAR, da ONU, tem trabalhado para vários governos e várias universidades, e está vindo pela primeira vez aqui em Brasília. Ele já esteve no Brasil antes, né, esteve na Rio +20, e agora ele veio para lançar esse seu livro, que é o Design de Culturas Regenerativas, que estava em inglês e agora acaba de ficar disponível em português. Foi um trabalho maravilhoso, feito pela editora Wahl, que em pouco tempo conseguiu traduzir e imprimir o livro, coincidindo com a vinda do Daniel ao Brasil. Ele já esteve, antes de chegar aqui a Brasília, no Rio e em São Paulo, e nós estamos cumprindo um ciclo, né, que é chamado ciclo de design regenerativo, com atividades Rio, São Paulo e Brasília. So we're going to continue our conversation, and I just showed your book, Design of Regenerative Cultures, and I would like you to speak about the books. One thing I find very interesting in the books, that you start mentioning how important it is to make the right questions. Could you perhaps comment about this?
Yeah, when I first sat down with the intention to write this book, I very quickly asked myself the question, what is it that I can actually write in these pages that would have any significance in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years' time? And I also started reflecting on how throughout the history of humanity, most of the times when people propose new solutions and new answers to old problems, they do so with good intentions. They really want to make things better for their people. And then years later, those solutions turn into problems. You could say that today's problems are yesterday's solutions. And so to assume that we have now reached a point where we're so educated that our solutions are going to be the perfect solutions that will last forever might be a little bit arrogant. Maybe we should learn that solutions are almost always temporary. And so I began to play around with this idea that maybe the compass that one generation can hand to the next generation to stir into a regenerative and sustainable future isn't a set of principles and answers and you have to do this, but it's actually a set of questions that they have to keep asking. And so the book has 250 questions in it, and each chapter ends not with a summary of answers and specific points, but with a series of questions.
I understand the most important questions in life have not a single answer. They lead to a process of understanding, of learning. Ramana Maharshi used to say this, the great Indian sage. One of the questions he used to make is, who am I? It's a question that is almost impossible to answer. And as you live, you start to understand a little bit of what you are, but there's always something more. So there's not a definite answer. If you answer, you limit the possibilities. So the real important questions are something you have to take along with you throughout life, right?
Yeah, that's true on the personal level, and it's also true on the collective level. The minute you tell people a solution or an answer or a principle, what you're asking them to do is to join you and follow what you've already established. But if you turn it into a question, then you're actually inviting people to co-create with you, and you're inviting collective intelligence to come forth and explore together how, because it's very important that the title has a plural in it. It's designing regenerative cultures, because cultures emerge out of the dynamic relationships in a particular place between people and that place.
And they evolve throughout time, and
Absolutely.
As people change, culture also changes. And it's very interesting to be open to change. This is something that's very important in this new view that because nature is also changing, adapting,
Exactly.
and refreshing itself.
We will never get to the destination sustainability or the destination regenerative cultures, because when we think we're there, then the ground we're standing on has shifted and we have to change again. That's the one constant in life is continuous change. And being a regenerative culture is increasing the capacity of people in place to respond to that change in a way that it enriches the overall system and the health and wholeness of the community and the wider community of life.
But our educational process was built around the idea that the teacher knows and he will tell you what to do, how to behave, what to think, how to think. And this is something that's changing radically now in this new culture. And people sometimes want answers, not questions. And so this is quite a movement towards a new world that's emerging.
Absolutely. Also because in our knowledge, even our scientific knowledge and our technological capabilities are now evolving so fast that even with universities, by the time you get out of a master's degree, it's already out of date. And with universities taking so long to finalize the curriculum of a particular course, by the time the course has been approved by the government and taught a few times, it's already out of date again. So I think we need to make a shift and really understand that we have to live the questions more deeply rather than think that we have to repeat the answers from 20 years ago.
I like this idea of living the question. I think it's beautiful to live the question, because when you have a very deep question, you start observing. Instead of trying to repeat what somebody said, you try to go to the world and observe and interact with the world and see what's happening really.
If you pass me the book, you might even want to read this. It's just a very short piece from a German poet, Rainer Maria Rilke, which is advice to another young poet. It's just this little paragraph.
So I'm going to read this piece. It's from the first chapter, é o primeiro capítulo do livro. Vivendo as perguntas. Por que mudar a narrativa agora? Então, uma citação de Rainer Maria Rilke, de 1903. Tenha paciência com tudo não resolvido no seu coração e tente amar as perguntas por si mesmas, como se elas fossem salas trancadas ou livros escritos em uma língua estrangeira. Não procure respostas que não podem lhe ser entregues agora, pois não será capaz de vivê-las. O ponto é viver tudo. Viva as perguntas agora. Talvez depois, um dia no futuro, gradualmente, você irá, sem perceber, encaminhar-se para achar a resposta. Very nice.
That's what inspired me to write this book and focus on questions rather than answers.
Yes. And we don't have answers to the main problems that we have in life, right? For instance, global warming. It's quite an issue nowadays, but nobody has answers to find out what to do to avoid, this.
Well, in this case, I think that answers and solutions are transitory means to get to better questions. But with regard to global warming, I think we know now what to do. We need to bring carbon back into the soil and into standing forests and change our material culture to be based on biomaterials rather than fossil materials. And in doing so, we can not just adapt or mitigate climate change, we can actually reverse climate change. I was part of a meeting that the Global Commonwealth called in London, where people from 53 countries came together to look at how we can begin to reverse climate change through basically regenerative agriculture, regenerative forestry, agroforestry, a shift in our material culture, or the American scientist Paul Hawken wrote a book, or with a team of people edited a book called Drawdown. We have 100 technologies that are proven to draw down carbon out of the atmosphere and through that respond to climate change. And at the same time, we will heal our ecosystems, we will create cultures that are more place-based. We do have a lot of answers.
Yeah, but still, people are not totally convinced what they have to do, because the emissions continue to grow in spite of all the work of scientists and groups that have been showing that we have to reduce consumption, we have to reduce emissions. Are you still optimistic about how things are going to happen from now on?
I think we're facing a point in human history that is almost like a rite of passage. We really have to respond to this challenge within the next 2 to 5 years, or it might be too late. But if we respond quickly and at a planetary scale, but when I say planetary scale, I mean locally everywhere rather than one big project, I think we have a chance. And we need to live from that place of believing that we can still turn this around and heal ourselves and heal the planet in the process.
So you are optimistic that we can change. The people, through, one of the problems that I see is that we have to change using education, because people are not aware enough of what's happening. Most people don't care because they don't know. How are we to bridge this educational problem now, the lack of education of the majority of the population?
That's a question that would take a long answer. But I think that we both work with Gaia Education. We've created a global network of educators around the world that takes a design-based approach to look at the problems that we're facing and offers people solutions. And the network has been growing for the last 12 years, using a whole systems design approach, the social, the economic, the ecological, and the worldview dimension of change. And if I look in Brazil, the travels that I've just been doing the last few days, there's a wonderful network of change makers that has been trained by Gaia Education that are doing amazing work all over the country. And so when I meet them, I'm hopeful. When I watch the news, I'm distraught.
That's what we do here in TV Supren. We always try to show the good side of life, the good initiatives, the good projects, the people that are making a difference in shifting what's happening in our world, bringing a new vision, a new outlook of life. And I recommend that people that are watching this program read the book that's now available in Portuguese, because it has a lot of examples of what's being done elsewhere in other countries. And when we see there are many people doing nice work, you get more hopeful. You see, there are a lot of people that are interested in doing nice work.
Absolutely, and I think we're at a point of inflection. It's rapidly growing. Every day there's more and more of us that understand that now is the time to act, and that we have the future not just of our children, but of really our species and a large part of life on Earth in our hands, and we need to act now.
We have to think about the 7 next generations, as people say.
Yeah.
Okay, Daniel, thank you very much for coming, and we hope we can continue working together and trying to build this new humanity, this new civilization based in cooperation, in love, in compassion. So we are together in this.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Então nós estamos agora encerrando o nosso Papo Supren e até a próxima vez.